In today's video, I will be telling 4 terrifying stories, from a potential demon in a mirror to some odd happenings in the woods. This video will cover a few different topics. A huge thank you to the writers, whose links can be found in the description, for allowing me to share their stories with all of you. Remember, you can send in your own stories to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, please be sure to like and comment. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Let me start off by asking you a question. Do you know what happens to your reflection when you look away from it? I'm typing this as my parents don't care, or believe me, and neither do the shrinks that they have made me go to. I know it's going to sound out there, but it's true, and I really need your help. At the very least, I need to know if any of you have experienced the same thing that I'm going through, and how to stop it if that's even possible. I was too late to help my brother, and I don't want to succumb to the same fate. I'll start from the beginning. My brother is, or was, 1 year older than me. We were close when we were younger, and I honestly don't remember a time before the age of 12 when we weren't together. We would go out exploring whenever we stayed at my grandparents' house, as they had a forest behind it. People used to say that we looked alike. I never saw the resemblance, but I did think that sometimes we sounded the same. After the age of 12, we stopped hanging out as much, as he got really into football and other sports, whereas I was more into spending my time reading comics or playing video games. I suppose it was normal that we would grow apart, but don't get me wrong, we still enjoyed each other's company. We just didn't hang out as much as we used to. Well, this was before he turned 15, and got really into the occult and the supernatural. His obsession started off normal. He started reading books on myths and legends, hanging up pictures of pentagrams which replaced his football posters and his more adult posters. One morning I walked past Patrick's room, and he was painting letters all over his walls. He had even painted them on the ceiling. I say they were letters. Honestly, I didn't recognize the letters or symbols he was painting, but it was the same ones repeatedly all over his room. I went up to him and asked him what he was doing. He just replied with, "They're here to protect me. I won't be taken. I refuse to let him win." As he said this over and over again, while going back to painting the symbols, I could see the bags under his eyes. He looked completely exhausted. I told him that maybe he should get some sleep. He just replied with, "I can't. He will get me. I can't let him get me." I told my parents over dinner that I was worried about Patrick, who hadn't left his room to eat. I should have known better. You see, my parents aren't really the caring type. My father is a high-profile lawyer, and he spends most of his time out with clients or at the office preparing for different meetings and court appearances. My mother is an architect and spends most of her time working from home, so you would think we would see her a lot more, but when she's working, she will lock herself in her office for days at a time, and no matter what happens, she won't come out until she's finished. So both my parents were very job-focused, and between them they cared more about our image as a family than us as their children. The only time I really saw them was on a Wednesday night over dinner, which we usually ate in silence. They weren't concerned about Patrick. I don't even think they noticed he was acting strangely. After that, I kept an eye on him whenever I could. His behavior kept getting weirder and weirder. He started removing anything in his room that could show his reflection. First, it was covering up his windows with cardboard, and then he threw out his laptop and his computer. He even got rid of his CD cases and his phone, as depending on the light, you could see your reflection in them. One night, I woke up to the sound of broken glass being shattered and hitting the floor. I left my bedroom and headed towards the bathroom Patrick and I shared. As I opened the bathroom door, I saw Patrick standing in the center of the bathroom, facing what used to be the mirror. He was punching the mirror, or what was left of it, repeatedly. There was blood dripping down his arms, causing a pool of blood to form around his ankles. This then flowed into a river which began draining out of the bathroom door, covering my feet in the process. The mirror was destroyed. If it wasn't for the penny-sized shards slowly being consumed by the river of blood, you wouldn't have even known there was a mirror there to begin with. In the end, it took 2 paramedics to drag my brother out of the bathroom and into the ambulance. You could see pieces of bone sticking out of his hands, along with shards of the mirror. The doctors said he had broken almost every bone in his right hand, and had broken 3 fingers in his left. It would take a whole year before he was able to do something as simple as holding a pen to write with, and you could see the scars on both his hands where the bone and mirror had pierced the skin. Shortly after the incident, my parents lost it. They started yelling at him. "How could you do this to us? Do you know how hard it's going to be to explain this to people in a way that doesn't look bad on the family?" After that, Patrick didn't talk anymore. You could barely hear him breathing. My parents didn't care that Patrick was hurt. All they cared about was how this damaged their image, and how badly this reflected on them. Patrick then spent most of his time hidden away in his room, usually in complete darkness. I asked him why he was afraid of his reflection, and he just looked at me, but never looked in my eyes. He just stared at my shoulder. My parents made my brother go to therapy. He wasn't talking, so I didn't see the point, but it was easier for them to claim Patrick was mentally disturbed, instead of figuring out how to help him. After a year of physiotherapy and seeing a psychiatrist, Patrick finally started talking again, and he could do simple things with his hands, like holding a pen or typing on a keyboard. Unfortunately, it wasn't all good news. It was true that Patrick started talking again, but the only thing that passed through his lips was a simple question. "Do you know what happens to your reflection when you look away from it?" This was all he said. It didn't matter if someone was talking to him or not. Every now and again, he would just ask the question. He did seem at least a little happier. I even heard him laugh a couple of times. He wasn't writing on the walls anymore, and he stopped reading books on the supernatural. He didn't get over his fear of the reflection, but he seemed more stable. I should have listened to him, or tried to help understand what he was trying to tell me, instead of thinking that he was just talking rubbish, and that he would go back to normal. It would just take time. Over the last couple of years, our parents stopped trying when it came to Patrick. That changed when my father was up for a promotion. He had a chance to become a judge, and the only thing that would stop this from happening was Patrick. It didn't matter that he was slowly getting better. All that concerned my father was that people knew him as having a special son, and he refused to let this affect his chances of becoming a judge. That day, my father had come home earlier than usual. I was in my room when I heard him going in and out of the spare room. Then I heard drilling coming from outside my room. I got up and opened my bedroom door, to find my father installing a lock on the door to the spare room. What was strange was that my father was putting the lock on the outside of the door, and not on the inside. Before I could ask him what he was doing, he stood up and walked into my brother's room. I heard something get knocked to the floor, and then what sounded like Patrick yelling. My father then came bursting out of the room, dragging Patrick behind him by his hair. I ran over to him yelling at the top of my lungs, "Dad, what are you doing? Let him go. Dad, put him down." My father just looked at me, no emotion in his eyes, and with the base of the drill in his left hand struck me across the forehead. The force of it caused me to fall back away from the door. I could feel the blood beginning to drip down my forehead and into my eye, blurring my vision. As I tried to focus my vision, I could see what my father had done to the spare room. He had covered every inch of the room, even the ceiling, with mirrors. As I dragged myself to my feet, my father came out of the spare room and locked the door with a heavy padlock. "Now you're going to stay in there until you grow up and get over this stupid fear you have," my father yelled as he started heading downstairs. I ran to the door, pulling the padlock as hard as I could muster, while blood continued to drip down my face. No matter what I did, I couldn't help Patrick. "Knock it off. You can't get him out of that room, so just leave him alone and clean yourself up." I ignored my father and just kept pulling on the padlock. "Patrick, can you hear me? Just close your eyes," I shouted, hoping my voice would break through the screaming I could hear on the other side of the door. I sat down with my back to the door and just listened. Let me out! Let me out! He's going to get me! Please, I can't be in here. I could hear Patrick yelling, and then I heard the smashing of mirrors and more screaming. I couldn't help him. All I could do was listen to his high-pitched screams of terror, while I sat by the door, tears and blood dripping down my face and hitting the floor. It wasn't until the following morning when the screaming finally stopped. It was silent. I couldn't even hear my own breath. My mother never left her office. All night my brother had been screaming and smashing mirrors, and yet she never popped her head out of the office to see what was happening. It was another couple hours of pure silence, until my father came up the stairs. Are you going to behave now? If I open this door and you're not over this irrational fear of your reflection, I'll leave you in there for the rest of the weekend. He unlocked the padlock and pushed the door open. You could hear shards of the mirror being crushed by the opening door. Patrick was standing in the middle of the room facing away from us. There were shards of the broken mirror everywhere, except there wasn't any in a 30-centimeter circle around Patrick's feet. The blood. Patrick's blood was everywhere. It was on the walls and dripping down off the ceiling. On the floor there were bloody handprints, and in the corner, on the room, there was a single unbroken mirror. Leading from the center of the room to the mirror was drag marks that cut right through the river of blood on the floor. There were what looked like fingernails floating in the pool of blood that was directly in front of it. Patrick turned around and he was fine. He had no cuts, no shards of the mirror sticking out of his skin. He just turned around and smiled at us. Hey Dad, I think I'm better now, but I am kind of hungry. What's for breakfast? Patrick said while walking towards us. Sure, let's go down and eat. Patrick, make sure this never happens again. Dad said while beginning to walk down the stairs. I just stood there in a daze, thinking there must be an explanation to the blood in the room, and why Patrick didn't have a scratch on him. When he walked past me, I saw his reflection in the corner mirror. It was Patrick, but it wasn't the Patrick that was standing next to me. The Patrick in the mirror had blood pouring out of his eyes. There were chunks of mirror sticking out of his face. He was screaming. I couldn't hear him, but I knew he was screaming. He was in so much pain. Then the reflection was gone. My brother was gone, and in its place was it. The thing that was walking down the stairs in place of my brother. I know what I saw was real. My brother was trapped, or maybe he was dead. My parents are too blind to see that the thing that looks like Patrick isn't really him, and I can't do a thing to save him. The reason why I'm telling you all this is because this morning, while I was brushing my teeth in front of the mirror, I bent down to spit, and when I came back up, my reflection was staring at me. I don't mean that I was just staring at myself. It was like it was waiting for me to come back up, but it didn't move. It was just there. Then it smiled at me. The next time you're looking at your reflection in the mirror, I want you to ask yourself one thing. Do you know what happens to your reflection when you look away from it? It all starts with a story. My grandmother told me this one when I was a kid. It's about a monster. A monster that wore a crown of nightmares. She called it the Nightmaker. It lived deep in a cave, in the cold and the dark. It sat on a throne of soft rock that bled and screamed when anyone touched it, waiting for tributes and sacrifices. All sorts of old horrors would go into the cave to pay tribute to the Nightmaker, and all sorts of new horrors would come out. The Nightmaker ruled every dark place men feared, from bedroom closets and city alleys to the depths of the deepest oceans. Every time you went into his domain, the Nightmaker was watching you. If a child misbehaved and walked into the darkness, the Nightmaker would snatch him or her and turn them into a demon. My grandma was a mad woman. She was my closest living relative after my parents died, so I had to listen to ravings, or risk the streets for the night. She'd rave and rave about the Nightmaker hours into the night, and shake me up the moment my eyes started to droop. He'll get ya, in the night, He'll take you and I'll give you to him. I'll give you to the Nightmaker. When the men in white coats finally took her away, she was still raving. Jason, tell them. Tell them I'm not insane, Jason. Tell them or I'll give you to him. I'll give you to the Nightmaker. I, an 8-year-old boy, could do nothing but sob and beg them not to take away my grandma, or else the Nightmaker would take me. Now, looking back, I'm sure my pleas had quite the opposite effect on the doctors. It was only later in life, when I met a family who took care of me, when the full scoop of my grandmother's abuse began to sink in, and it was much later still, how horrifically I'd been changed by her. I was programmed to never go into any dark places, no matter what. I got violent panic attacks whenever I was forced to do so. Any sign of deep water and closed rooms left me struggling to breathe. Most of all, I was afraid of caves. It took decades of therapy for me to overcome my programming. I spent a lot of my nights just on the brink of an attack, hyperventilating while I stared out of the darkness and imagined the Nightmaker watching me. It did get better though. Life was hard, but it still went by. It passed the fastest when I was with people I trusted. My new family was a big part of that, but there were other people too. I met a girl I liked, Amanda. She was a brave lady, a firefighter, and well, she was the kind of person I always wanted to be. I don't know why she liked me back, but she did. We had a daughter together. She was beautiful. I was happy. Was I happy? Valentine's Day. That was the day, wasn't it? When everything went wrong. It was twilight when I drove up to my house in my car. I got out and the first alarm bell started ringing. All the lights were switched off. Amanda wouldn't do that, would she? She knew about my past. She knew how bad I got. But Amanda was always pushing me to get better. I had to push for her too. I opened the front door and walked into the dark house. I felt my way to the living room, letting brief sunset rays guide me. I felt something on the table. A box of chocolates. I delicately placed one in my mouth, putting myself at the mercy of my trust. As the sweetness enveloped me, all suspicions went out. Who else would know my favorites? Amanda? Sweetie? Nothing. Only the silence and the dark. Where was my daughter? Why was she so quiet? I was walking down the hall to her room when I noticed my walk started to get more and more sluggish. I barely managed to open her bedroom door. She wasn't there. Her bed lay empty. I tried to turn around, but my knees gave out. I fell with a hard thunk. I was trying hard to maintain my breathing when out of the corner of my eye I spotted something. A shadowy figure standing in the corner of her room. It seemed to notice my stare and started walking closer and closer, right up to my face. The crazed feature of my grandmother was now in full view. "You kept my great-granddaughter away from me." Her voice was like a knife running on my back. I felt her fingers digging into my face. Her crazed eyes looked into mine. "I'll give her to the Nightmaker. You'll see then." As she got up and started walking away, I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell and kick and punch. But nothing. For hours I just lay there, on the floor, unmoving. By the time I could move my limbs again, they were gone. The house was empty, and I was alone. Amanda's body was in our bedroom. Her blood dripped out from her neck and onto the carpet. I hugged her, sobbing, begging, crying in the dark. For a moment I just stood there, holding her body stiff. I didn't know what to do. All I knew was that I was afraid. Her voice, her cold dead voice came back. It scratched at the back of my mind, like a rat in walls. I'll give her to the Nightmaker. I knew where she was. Half walking, half crawling, I made my way to my car. She had to have been walking, so I could still catch up to her. Driving through the night half paralyzed, I almost crashed once or twice, but I didn't slow down. As the drive progressed, my movements started getting faster and more alert. I was almost back to normal when my destination came in sight. Our old house, where she used to torture me. I stepped out of my car, ignoring the house, and started walking into the woods behind it. I knew I wasn't far behind her. It was like I could smell her, read her every decision, trace her every step, like I could think like her. I walked through the woods, as the sun started to peek out from the horizon. Dawn wasn't going to help me. Light didn't go where I was going. It didn't take me long to find it. The place in the woods. The only place she'd ever take my daughter. A cave. I cocked my gun and started walking. Memories of being thrown down here started to surface. The ghost calls of, "He'll get you," threatening to send me running, to stop me dead cold. I walked in deeper and deeper. Stalagmites like giant fangs hung above my head. 1,000 paths opened to me, but I was never confused. The darkest paths, only those. The Nightmaker wouldn't live anywhere else. I must have walked for an hour. The first seeds of doubt started burrowing into my head, when a cold voice, like the dead, came from somewhere in front of me. "Give up, Jason." I pulled out my gun and pointed it at the darkness, waiting. "She's dead, Jason. I killed her." I fired. The sound of the shot cracked at my ears, painful and amplified by its echoes. After that, silence. Then the sound of feet hitting the ground, a figure running towards me. My daughter rushed to my arms, sobbing as I hugged her. I could feel her tears wetting my shirt. I pushed apart just for the tiniest of instants to tear the duct tape off her mouth before pulling her back in. All this while my grandma was screaming, in pain and madness. This final time, her insanity was my salvation. She wasn't going to kill her great-granddaughter. She hadn't come all the way here just to kill her. She hadn't found the Nightmaker yet. Her screams echoed over to us. "Jason, it hurts. Jason, how could you do that to your family?" "You're not my family." With that, I grabbed my daughter's hand and started walking back the way I came. She didn't follow us. She stayed there, telling me to come back and help her. When it became clear we weren't turning back, she started threatening. Her threats, what she would do to my daughter. I kept walking. When we were just a few meters from the cave entrance, something changed. Her voice, now a distant echo, came up from the deep darkness. "Help, Jason, help. It's got me, Jason." We kept walking. Later, a 6-man team was sent in to recapture her, but they never found her body. All they ever heard was her screaming in the distance, somewhere deep in the cold and the dark. I am sliding into the mountains now. The sun is heavy and the air is thin, and snow is clumped on ridges on indiscriminate patterns. They are calling. I've been hearing their music for a long time. They sing to me, no matter where I am in the world, no matter what I'm doing. Their song is timbrous, enchanting, inviting. It speaks of great heights and lush meadows, of gritty boulders and ancient trees, of secret mists that hide secret valleys. Most of the time when I tell people this, they nod. Everyone has a calling, they say. We all have our passions. But they misunderstand. I don't try to correct them anymore. It's too hard to explain that the song also whispers indiscernible lyrics about other things, unknown things, things incomprehensible to my conscious mind. As I penetrate the outer foothills, the singing has become louder and full of joy. My head is filled with music and the pull grows stronger. I have resisted for as long as I can. The mountains tower over me. I am but an ant at the feet of gods. I realize that I'm scared. The music is too sweet. It has always been too sweet. It is a sugary morsel designed to attract an ant. My bus is stopping. I feel myself get up. I see the bus schedule over the exit, and know this bus is about to turn around, that it will go back to the city. But I walk forward onto the curb, in a tiny dilapidated mountain town. The wind blows gently, like a yawn. No one else is getting off at this stop. The bus pulls away. I watch for a moment, eyes furrowed. A recessed part of me wanting to scream at the bus driver to stop, to let me back in. I don't. I turn and walk away. Away from the town and away from the bus, and away from civilization. I walk into the woods. The cacophony in my mind is so loud now that I can't hear anything else. I pass a babbling brook, but can't hear the babble. I see birds in the trees around me. They open their beaks and I know they are joining in the song. More settle on open branches, and then more again, until I am surrounded by ruffling wings and beady eyes and swaying branches. I walk on and the birds move with me. I am shaking now. The evergreen forest is growing darker and I see shadows stretch and lengthen faster than they should be able, all creeping towards me despite the position of the fading evening sun. The feeling of missing my dogs is overwhelming. Human relationships are always hard for me, but dogs are simple in the way they love. I could use their reassurance. The mountain shadows now swallow me entirely. I see the sun begin to set between jagged peaks, defiantly casting streaks of blood against the deep purple sky. I am miles into the woods. I begin to grow thirsty and find another stream. As I drink, I see yellow orbs begin opening around me, and I realize they are eyes with dark, slitted pupils. Intelligent, sentient. They watch me through dense shrubs from no less than 50 paces. My mind recoils in shock, doubly so because the music in my head has abruptly stopped. The music has been plaguing me for years on repeat. The eyes don't move, only stare. Their gaze is impenetrable. I slowly back away from the stream. The sudden silence is so much worse than the singing. I am alone and near dark, surrounded by devil knows what, and I am empty of all but despair. I hear rustling from behind and nearly jump out of my skin as I turn to face the sound. I am crouched like a feral animal when I see a woman emerge from the brush. She has the same penetrating yellow eyes that peer from every direction. Her pale white skin glows of its own accord in the moonless night. I find her immeasurably beautiful. She says nothing, only comes closer. Her mouth opens not to speak but to sing, and the music resumes again, not in my mind but out loud. It is echoed from all directions within the trees. Her mouth is still stretching open, wider and wider, impossibly so, the song pouring out into a rising crescendo. I stand stark still, unable to move. She is within arm's reach now. I see no teeth in her mouth, no tongue, only an endless abyss. She takes my hand in hers, guides me towards the forest and the still unblinking eyes. I go willingly. The mountains are deep and full and dark, and they whisper my name. I graduated high school 3 years ago. Me and a few of my close friends were hanging out late at night, and decided to run by our old school. Now, our school was situated a few blocks away from a pond. We had a few good memories from this pond, as seniors waiting for detention, and having lost a pair of shoes to it. We decided to visit, and see if we could find our old shoes. This was a mistake. Upon arriving around 6:30 p.m., it wasn't dark yet. Getting out of the car, we noticed someone sitting in their car with their headlights on behind us about 100 feet. We didn't think much of it, as this was a residential area. Figured they were waiting for somebody. So we began to walk into the woods that follow the pond. We were all laughing and joking, hoping we can find our shoes just for the laugh. We stand around looking in trees where we thought we had put one of the shoes, but couldn't find it. After about 45 minutes of looking, it was dark. Already there, we decided to explore the woods for fun. Before I go on, the layout is important here. In front of me and my friends stood a forest, trees, and a hiking path. To our left was more forest. To our right was a narrow creek, and on the other side of the creek was a hill and forest. Behind us was a pond, with about 500 feet between us and the car. Now, my friend Anthony, just as we began walking into the woods, tapped my shoulder and said, "Hey, what's that?" I looked to my right, past the creek, and hopping down the hill, I saw a small figure. Upon seeing it, I got that feeling of immense dread in my stomach. Of course, I thought it was paranoia. I now know better. I told him, assuming this was true, "It's just a squirrel, don't worry." As I said this, the thing stopped in its tracks. It seemed like it was looking in our direction, and all went silent for a moment. All of us, me and my friends, there were 5 of us, stopped. A few seconds in and this thing just flashes. A very bright white light flashes at us, almost like a flashlight. At this, me, my friend Anthony, my other friend Dags, all don't say a word, and sprint as fast as we can for the car. My other 2 friends followed behind us. We got in the car and sped out of there as quickly as possible. Once a few blocks away and after discussing it, we decided to go back. Upon arriving, me and Dags are too scared to go back in, so we stay in the car for a quick getaway. My friends Ken, Richard, and Anthony all get out and begin walking in to investigate. About 15 minutes later, we call them. They say they can't find anything, and said they'd look a little more before leaving. Me and my friend Dags decide, screw it, why don't we go in too? So we get ourselves together and get out. As soon as we close the door to the car, up the hill we see a car pull up on top of the hill. Again, layout is important, so due to the pond and the woods, the street we were on had a view of the cross streets all the way up the hill. This is where the car was, at the top of the hill on the cross streets. The car sped up, stopped up there, turned off their headlights, and sat there. No one got out, no one got in. At this, we jumped back into my friend's car immediately, and called our friends. We told them about the car. They said don't worry, so we waited. A few minutes passed and still nothing from the car. So we told them to get out of there, and they did. As we turned the car on and began to move, the car at the top of the hill did the same. My friend Dags floored it, and turned onto the cross street in front of it. We sat in front of the car waiting, curious, and not wanting it to follow us. We waited at least 15 minutes, before finally, he did a U-turn and left. At this, we drove home. This was a few months ago, and I still have no way to explain it. I don't know what happened, whether it was all related or what it was. At first, I considered the light having been the glare of an animal's eyes, but the problem is it was very overcast. So how could the moon do that? And it was brighter than glare from an eye of an animal. To this day, it's one of the scariest moments I've ever faced, and I have no idea what happened.